Well, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to speak tonight. And I want to thank Asian Inc. not only for its work in the business development that you've heard so much about, but also the housing and the education that Michael talked about. Your invitation arrived when I was finishing a legal brief on the most important case on affirmative action in the last decade, Fisher versus University of Texas. I had just written that for the Asian American community, the admission of a large number of Asian American students to universities, the good news, doesn't give a complete picture of civil rights in our community. The difficulty that Asian Americans have after they graduate from college in becoming leaders in companies and as business people, the bad news is also part of that picture. That's what I'm going to talk about tonight. Far too many of us know about glass ceilings from our family experiences, and Judy Chu talked about that. I'd like to talk a little about my family. My father, Lee Lim, an immigrant, had the smallest possible small business. We had a hand laundry in Manhattan. After he got out of the American Army in the Second World War, he came back to New York City. He took off the uniform and he went back to work in the laundry. In those days, he had no choice. It was either the laundry or a Chinese restaurant. And you can see that Judy's family had the other alternative. My father's capital was his labor and my mother's labor. They opened that laundry 6 days a week at 7 a.m. and closed at 9 p.m. Yet they produced my brother Ernest, a minister, and me, a civil rights lawyer. Our children don't appreciate what our parents' lives were like. They know them from old age and from those faded photographs. The hard edges have been worn off. It's hard to convey to children their fierce convictions. Unlike Judy's grandfather, my parents didn't want me working in that laundry. They refused to teach me how to iron, although that would have made their lives easier. Their reasoning was that if I learned to iron, which was the skilled work in that little laundry, I might be tempted to remain a laundryman. They didn't want that. Instead, they made us, my brother and me, sort the dirty laundry, which was the worst work. I was only too happy to go off to college. It's also hard to convey to the children their fierce passions. When I got into college, my father couldn't contain himself. In his broken English, he said to this white customer, "All that good news." The man's reaction was to tell my father that a laundryman's son didn't deserve to go to that college, and that his son should have had that spot. Why do I say passion? My father took that dirty laundry, threw it back at the guy, and told him never to come back. his boy was every bit as good as anybody else. Of course, my mother pointed out that that was one of our best customers. My father said it was worth it. My wife, Carolyn's father, Ken Yee, started out as an electrician at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. He was a poor boy who grew up and went to the public schools in Hawaii. He got into MIT before the Second World War. But speaking and reading German, the scientific language of that day, was a prerequisite to going to MIT. But in the Hawaiian public schools, they didn't teach German. Only the private schools did. So Ken settled for a job as an electrician at the shipyard. The years rolled by, he found he couldn't get promoted to a management job because he was Chinese. This was at a time when China was an ally of the United States. After the war, he escaped by starting his own business, an electrical shop, with his wife Nancy. The business was successful, and he and Nancy raised 4 children, all of which went to college and became professionals. It's a very familiar story for our community. Oh, I should mention that Ken finally did get to go to college after he retired. He graduated Phi Beta Kappa from the University of Hawaii when he was 70. But discrimination and exclusion continue. Affirmative action at bottom is an acknowledgement that we have a problem. Affirmative action, or taking race into account, started in the 1960s. This is a history we all know. And it was a way for government and private institutions to overcome the consequences of discrimination and exclusion for minority groups. In California, the University of California included Asian Americans in race-conscious admissions because so few Asian Americans went to the university. Asian Americans only stopped being included when they got into UC in sufficient numbers through regular admissions. Some right-wing Asian American organizations, in arguing against affirmative action for African Americans and Latinos at UC, ignore that our community benefited from those same programs. But affirmative action did not stop at the college door. Being denied an education is not the only way minorities have suffered disadvantage. Affirmative action was extended by President Johnson to hiring and promotion of companies doing business with the federal government. You know this because that's one of the heart of what Asian Inc. has been up to these 41-odd years. In the 1970s, President Nixon extended race-conscious programs to small businesses receiving government contracts. Asian Inc. surely knows about that. Unlike the educational affirmative action programs, these affirmative action measures have continued to include Asian Americans. All these programs are based on the same promise. If the sins of the past continue into the present and result in exclusion, the government and responsible institutions will take steps to level the playing field so that Asian Americans and other minorities will not suffer disadvantage. I'm grateful that Congresswoman Chu and Michael talked about the numbers, so I don't have to give you the numbers. The same promise is made by our civil rights laws. When Asian Americans are discriminated against, courts will find discrimination and order remedies to eliminate exclusion.